Welcome back to the Rod Arquette Show with your guest host, me, usually the wingman, but Citizen Hughes, joining you this for the full program here, and we're having a great time. We've been talking about a lot of important issues, getting great calls on these issues. This is a very related topic to the issues of TikTok or censorship or the government's role in these things. Joining us on the program right now is Jenin Younes, and she is the litigation counsel for the new Civil Liberties Alliance. And thank you for joining us on the program, Jenin. We have a Supreme Court hearing. There'll be oral arguments on Monday about jawboning. It's a very interesting term. Murthy versus Missouri. Maybe you could share with listeners what is it? What does jawboning mean, and what does it have to do with the federal government and its relationship with social media companies?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So jawboning is usually a term meant to describe the government pressuring private companies to do what it wants to do, or what it kind of can't do directly to accomplish its goals. In this case, what has happened is that the federal government's been involved in social media platforms, censorship of individuals who expressed views that differed from the government's on various subjects. So from COVID-19 to elections, the Hunter Biden laptop story. So essentially, the government put pressure on these companies to censor users who expressed opinions that diverged from the government.
So we've heard some of this before. You know, Biden would yell at Facebook for trying to kill citizens by allowing different points of view about COVID-19 or the vaccine. You've had these different, you could call it what, goading or something that from government. Is jawboning by itself? Can government express strong opinions to these companies? Is there any version of jawboning that's okay? And if not, or if it is, when does it cross the line into infringement of freedom of speech?
So what's different here is that Americans have a First Amendment protected right to freedom of speech. So, you know, when the government, say, jawbones a country about greenhouse gas emissions and says, you know, if these companies don't do things to lower greenhouse gas emissions, we're going to have to look at our options or something like that. They're not infringing on another constitutionally protected interest. Whereas here, government officials were telling the companies that if they didn't censor Americans who disagreed with them, that they would suffer consequences. And that violated those Americans' First Amendment rights to freedom of speech.
We're speaking with Jenin Younes, litigation counsel with the New Civil Liberties Alliance. There's a big case, these oral arguments. I know they start announcing the outcomes of these, but on Monday, when the oral arguments take place, what do you expect to hear from the government? What's their best defense? Because everything you've said, I think our listeners are cheering you right now, saying absolutely. Everything you've said is just spot on. We should be able to talk about COVID-19 pandemic, masks, and if they work or not, if the vaccines are for everyone and for kids, what happened in our 2020 presidential election. You should be able to have the discussion, is what I think everyone would say. But what's the government going to say in defense of why they're allowed to act the way they are?
So the government's best argument, and I don't think it's very good to be clear, is that the government has a right to persuade private industry to do the right thing. And so, you know, a government can say, hey, we think these companies should, curb greenhouse gas emissions because it's in the public interest. Or we think these companies should put a sign on a pack of cigarettes so that people know that there's a lung cancer risk. And that, actually, the lung cancer one isn't the best example because that does involve speech. But the reason that's not the same, again, is what I talked about earlier, where there is a First Amendment protected interest to right to freedom of speech. And so the government can't use its bully pulpit in order to persuade companies or coerce companies or anything to infringe on the freedom of speech. That's what the First Amendment says. It says that the government can't abridge the freedom of speech.
Do you have a fear? I have a fear. My fear is that there are algorithms that are doing this without even government talking about it, that are this whole idea that these are just platforms where freedom of speech can run and enjoy debate and dialogue. I don't know that it's exactly happening. And so I worry about that. And so this case is narrowly focused on whether government can control that or not. But looking more broadly, Jenin, what about is it a platform anymore? Is it more of a publisher? Is there really freedom of speech happening on our social media platforms nowadays?
Well, you're asking a very complex question that has sort of multifaceted answers. No, that's fine. So, I mean, these companies sort of control the public discourse in reality in a way that I think the framers of the Constitution couldn't possibly have anticipated, in 17 whatever. So that poses a problem. On the other hand, I think a lot of libertarians like myself don't really want to see more government regulation of private industry. So you probably know there are some cases out of Texas and Florida where those states enacted laws saying that the platforms can't censor people for expressing certain viewpoints. They can't engage in viewpoint discrimination. And those cases were challenged by the platforms, the social media companies, saying that they have free speech rights to censor, basically, or to curate their platforms as they see fit. And I think it's a tougher question in this case because this case is the government is clearly prohibited from trying to abridge or abridging the freedom of speech of Americans. The other case I think has some interest on both sides, and the Supreme Court just heard arguments on that those cases last month. So they're kind of related. It's clear the court is trying to figure out how to protect free speech while preserving the rights of private parties to do as they see fit. So we'll sort of see how this plays out.
You're a good sport. I know I pulled you into a broader conversation. Thank you for being a good sport and answering. Going back to this issue, and this is final question. Is there any scenario where government would be able to jawbone or to persuade or even gently on issues with social media, or should social media platforms be hands off when it comes to governments, be it federal, state, or whatever?
So I think the best counter examples are when there's a national security interest at stake. For instance, the Aryan Nation is recruiting members on social media, and the government would like to be able to tell the companies, hey, the Aryan Nation is doing this, you should take these posts down, something along those lines. I understand that there's a substantial interest on that side. On the other hand, if it's protected speech, I mean, if they're engaging in terrorist tactics or criminal speech, that's different. But if it's protected speech, it doesn't fall into any of the exceptions to free speech. It's tough. It's tough to stand by the argument that, the government really can't involve itself. But I think that's where we have to find ourselves, because once you allow the government to be involved in this kind of thing, we don't know where it ends. And that's what we've seen in this case where my clients were eminent scientists, epidemiologists who were censored on the area of their expertise about COVID-related matters because their beliefs about lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates differed from the government. And so I think we just don't want to give the government this power. That's what the First Amendment says, that every citizen is capable of determining for him or herself what the truth is, and we don't need or want the government to be involved. They are not the arbiters of the truth.
I'm going to leave it there because I couldn't say it better. Amen. You're getting a witness from the congregation here. I couldn't agree more. I hope that this great Supreme Court, which has made some pretty important rulings as of late, make sure that we keep government right out of these social media platforms. And then my personal opinion is we're not done there. I'd like to see them liable for some of the stuff they're doing if it's infringing on speech, the companies themselves. But anyway, thank you, Jenin, for joining us on the program, and keep up the good work. Thank you for informing us and doing the good stuff you're doing. Thank you.